1, 2, 3.
While our weekly shows are edited to time for broadcast on public TV and community radio, we offer to our members and podcast subscribers the full uncut conversation. The following is from our monthly Meet the BIPOC Press series. In this episode titled Democracy Under Siege, Battling Disinformation in the 2024 Election, Laura Flanders and friends assembled a panel of journalists to discuss who are the targets of disinformation and why. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters. Become a member now at lauraflanders.org/donate.
The deliberate spread of false or misleading data or stories is dangerous. It can affect the way we relate to one another and determine the choices we make. Fakes and hoaxes have always been with us. The British, for example, distributed fake messages from George Washington during the War of Independence, supposedly calling the whole thing off. But technology has only made the problem worse, accelerating how fast and how far lies can spread and how precisely they can be targeted. Theories like those that proliferated after the shooting of Donald Trump can quickly become facts, given the right amount of repetition. This time, on our Meet the BIPOC Press monthly feature, we're going to ask who are the targets of disinformation in election 2024 and what can be done to protect fact-based journalism. With me, Tamoa Calzadilla, the editor-in-chief of Factchequeado, a collaborative initiative to combat mis- and disinformation that targets Latino and Spanish-speaking communities. She's an award-winning investigative journalist from Venezuela whose work in the U.S. focuses on news literacy, conspiracy theories, and hate. Also, Esosa Osa. She is the former deputy executive director of Fair Fight Action, the voting rights organization founded by Stacey Abrams, and the founder of Onyx Impact, which just released a first-of-its-kind report looking at disinformation specifically in Black online spaces. And finally with us is Kadia Tubman, disinformation correspondent for Scripps News, a national broadcast news channel based in Atlanta. Formerly, Kadia was the managing editor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Insider's Global Newsroom and a national politics reporter at Yahoo News. Well, welcome all. I am so glad to have you. Kadia, let's start with you. Disinformation officer. I mean, there's a whole beat now dedicated to this story. How do you define disinformation? That's distinct from just good old lies.
I first think of it as intentional. It is done with an intent to either sow chaos, disruption, confusion, whatever it is. It's not just a matter of lies that we see or that we're sharing or we're telling each other or we're spreading around. It's actually an intentional act to confuse people. And in this day and age, as you already started to say and to lean on, is that when we're so social and so accessible to information, anyone could be a target for disinformation, but as it goes, anyone can be the person spreading it. But it absolutely starts with intent.
Esosa, coming to you. I mean, I remember stories of mostly GOP operatives in Democratic-leaning Black neighborhoods in places like Pennsylvania, even New Jersey, being caught distributing flyers in Black churches and Black neighborhoods saying that the election was going to be on a different day than it was actually going to be on. That's old. But you're looking specifically at what's happening now. What are you seeing?
So I would say that we're seeing the movement from disinformation. It's being spread by like propaganda and TV to across all communities, to really moving online as a hyperbolic spread of disinformation. And so as we see innovations in technology and generative AI and what have you, we see the cost of disinformation really approaching zero, and with some bad actors even being paid to spread disinformation, while the cost of accessing truth is becoming more and more expensive every year. And so we're really focused on some of the narratives that we see targeting towards Black communities, where the polling hours may be intentionally incorrect. It may be spreading disengaging content, divisive content in Black online spaces. And so with this new kind of wild west of the disinformation spreading online. We're focused on the spectrum.
So what do you mean that it is getting more expensive to get actual facts? I hate that phrase, but facts, and easier to get everything else.
So one of the things that generative AI allows us to do is to create very personalized content very, very quickly at almost no cost, right? And so you can create disinformation narratives online, hyper-personalized narratives incredibly quickly. We're also seeing that folks are, AI platforms are actually creating headlines and news articles that are more believable than actual journalist-based headlines. And so the cost of trying to decipher what is true, right, is going to by default increase. You need to find trusted messengers. That's going to take time. You need to subscribe to different news organizations. That's going to cost money, right? It's going to you need to make sure you're checking sources far more often. That's again going to take time. And so we're really in a brand new environment of trying to decipher what is true and what is not.
And it is sometimes true that reality is crazier than fiction. Coming to you, Temoa, you're looking specifically at Spanish-speaking communities. Why?
Hi, thank you for inviting me. We are focusing on Spanish-speaker communities because we consider that communities are vulnerable because they are more they are more relied to social media to inform themselves with messaging apps like WhatsApp, YouTube, Facebook, And for example, WhatsApp is an encrypted system, and you cannot have to access at what's going on there, where is the conversation there, the narrative of this information there. And it's the reason why, in fact, together we are building an alliance with other media outlets and organizations that are working for Spanish speakers, because we need.
So just to tease out that again, I'm hearing you're saying that the Spanish-speaking community is more likely to use closed systems or even encrypted systems like WhatsApp. Why?
Yes, is something that because of the background, because in Latin America we communicate with our families and friends by WhatsApp, for example, and it's the same behavior when you are in the United States, because you are in contact with all your families and Spanish speakers in Spain or in Latin America, And the study shows that Latinos are more relied to WhatsApp than other groups, for example, and they are more relied to use YouTube and Facebook to participate in politics discussions, to have conversations, and to share disinformation and misinformation.
So how do you even find out what's circulating in those circles, Samoa?
For example, we are seeing narrative or conspiracy theories about the electoral fraud, alleged electoral fraud in 2020, and that narrative is circulating again and again. But right now we can see that we see some comparison between Democratic Party and socialist regimes in Latin America, like Venezuela, it's my country, my native country, Nicaragua, and Cuba. And the narrative of this information about electoral fraud is very the Latino groups from Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba believe in that, because in our country, that's real. The electoral system is a disaster, and the electoral fraud is a reality, and they are more likely to believe in that in the United States.
Got it. All right, Kadia, coming back to you, I heard rumor has it you're working on a story actually on the lies that have been spreading, the disinformation that's been spreading since the supposed or the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, about which we know very little at the point of this recording. What's the story you're looking at?
We're looking at, or at least the team that I'm working with that is a part of the disinformation desk at Scripps, we're looking at how the spread of disinformation is happening in social media platforms right now after there's being a huge gap of information after the attempted assassination. I like to think of it as the first 48 hours. Like in the first 48 hours for police officers, if you can't get a lead or have some sort of insight into why something happened, why a crime happened, the chances of solving that crime cuts by 50%. I'm now thinking that if you can't get an answer as to why something happened, something like the shooting of a former president happening in the first 48 hours, those moments, you lose the truth, that you can't even begin to cut through the noise. And so right now, what we're looking at is just like an onslaught, a flood of disinformation on platforms like TikTok, X, Facebook, Reddit, across the gamut. And we're seeing two narratives, two conspiracies come up, one of it being that it was an inside job. And that conspiracy is actually based off of, it's being led by facts that are coming out around the Secret Service response. And those are being morphed, and those ideas, those facts are being morphed into conspiracy theories, because that's what all people have right now. They have the small pieces of information that's coming out, but then they're running with it to get an explanation of why this happened. And so we have the inside job theory and the other theory of it being staged. And that conspiracy theory is not just being spread by fringe actors on these social media platforms. They're being spread by vocal and verified and official folks. I mean, we're talking about lawmakers or candidates. And so what we're seeing right now with the disinformation after such a horrific and monumental event is that within the first 48 hours, and I can't even say first 48 hours, within the first few hours and first few minutes of it happening and people getting on social media, the conspiracy theories were flying, because obviously people want answers, and there's still not an answer as to the motive. And that gap right now is being filled with disinformation.
So it's almost as if there's a vacuum and that gets filled with all these stories. And once they're lodged in your brain, it's hard to get them out.
Absolutely. And that's going to be the issue that we see once there is an official statement, whether that's through multiple investigations that have been launched, however long it takes, weeks or months to get an answer. I mean, they're going to try and combat all the lies and disinformation that's already out there.
So coming back to you, Esosa, what did you see in Georgia, if there are stories that you want to tell from that campaign when you were working with Stacey Abrams? And what are you seeing now that you think would sort of crystallize the problem for people watching and listening to this program?
Absolutely. And just to, talk through what Kadia was saying, and describing kind of what we see today, when you all talked about filling the gap, that's actually the disinformation phenomenon that it's called. It's called the fill the gap phenomenon, right? And when something happens, the very first thing someone hears is what's going to kind of stay in their mind, right? And if you can't refill that gap with new information, with accurate information, it's going to become harder and harder to convince folks of what is true. That's why major events like this end up having disinformation and conspiracy theories last for years, for decades, right? And so y'all are absolutely correct. And what we saw in Georgia during the last presidential cycle, as a lot of you can imagine, was that initial, what we saw in the U.S., like an initial deluge of election fraud narratives that were to a degree that we hadn't really seen before, or at least for quite some time in the country. And once the November elections ended and the entire focus was on the Georgia runoffs, right, we saw this just hyper targeting of those narratives to folks in Georgia, and we saw those disinformation narratives morph into the next stage of that, which was online threats and harassment, especially to Black and brown election workers. Right.
So, and so things like if you did work, you can't work again, or if you did vote, you can't vote again, or what sorts of things are you talking about?
So I'm directly talking about more so it was the fault of election officials that people believed that different various fraud narratives. So they would find the names of these officials or these workers, these staffers, and they would put their names out online. They would have people target them. They would have people follow them. And so there was a lot of both security and safety initiative that we were pushing in 2020 to keep folks safe. And then post that 2021 election and that 2021 runoff, what we saw was that disinformation really saturate into these communities, right? And so folks started coming to, let's say, Board of Election meetings that may have had 10 people, right? Now had 40, and folks were showing up with happy faces. There was a happy face conspiracy theory about a specific company. And so when you see, that's a very important point in how disinformation spreads when it moves from online community to actual offline activation, right? When there's offline activation as it relates to disinformation, then you're going to have a community, a grassroots community that is going to have staying power. And so we're still seeing the effects of that here in Georgia, not just with the many anti-voting bills that have been passed, but even the state election board and them trying to just a couple of days ago, increase the number of poll watchers that could be in voting locations by like 3 times, right? In a random meeting. It's all kind of flowing from what we saw in 2020.
You make a good point that it is hard to counter disinformation with facts. Is that just a function of the way our brains work, or we get tired, or what do we know about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, disinformation works in a similar way, regardless of, your background, your income, your party. And that is that the more times that we hear something, the more likely we are to believe that thing is true and to believe other people believe it's true as well, right? We substitute repetition for truth. That's how you teach little kids basically anything, right? And so that truth is that fill the gap issue. Telling something that something they believe is wrong, right, doesn't necessarily fill the gap. Fact checking now becomes quite an emotional response. But what we do know works a bit better is highlighting the motivations of, why folks may be spreading these false truths or misleading narratives. Not necessarily trying to debunk those narratives, but saying things instead like, these folks probably don't want you to vote, or these folks are trying to take away your power, or we know that this person is a grifter, right? These types of motivation can actually be far more effective in refuting and pushing back on disinformation.
Now, Timoa, to you, we've done some reporting on the multiple vulnerabilities, particularly of the Spanish-speaking and migrant population, specifically the immigrant population, whose rights are very unclear. And I want to ask you what you think are the motivations of some of those spreading disinformation in the communities that you're studying today in this election.
With the immigration issue, we can see different motivations. For example, the Great Replacement theory, the immigrants are coming to the United States to vote to replace the white voters, etc., is to push racism or something like that, and is targeting other people, more conservative people. But when the scammers targeting about migration process, the special visas or TPS or something like that, is economic reasons or to defeat people, to deceive people with intention of scammer, But when the narrative is about the electoral process and with immigrants are criminals, or the crime is rising because of the people coming through the southern border, is with an electoral intention, right? They are voting, they are in the middle of the fraud plot or something like that. It's different, but all those narratives are doing damage.
And we're hearing that those narratives are working inside the Latino population in this country. a very large voting bloc, a bloc that is growing, in sympathy for the Republican candidate this time around. Talk a bit about that phenomenon and how important misinformation in the circles that you're studying could be to this specific election and that particular voting bloc.
Yes, in this particular election, the polarization is with conservative voting among Latinos. In South Florida, specifically South Florida, you can see a phenomenon: the radio shows. The radio shows have some anchors spreading a lot of disinformation, conservative narratives about the abortion until the last month of the pregnancy, comparison with socialist regimes that are dictatorships in Latin America, the relationship between the government and the weaponization of government to control you, to control your life, with the IRS, with your money, with your health. Do you remember when there were masks in the middle of the pandemic became in an issue, a political issue, an ideological issue, because they want to control me. That kind of narrative are very popular in South Florida because people came from dictatorship, from government that really control you or want to control you,
So it resonates.
While the commercial media is centered on what sells advertising, which is too often fear, we're centered on change makers, imagining a better world and creating the solutions to get us there. That's thanks to the generous support of viewers and listeners like you. While we are independent media, we do depend on you. Please contribute by making a one-time donation or make it monthly at lauraflanders.org/donate. As Angela Davis says, when vast numbers of people come together, this is how change happens. Please come together with us now. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your continued support.
Coming back to you, Kadia, it's important what Timoa just said, that we're not just talking about online. Like, there's good old radio. There's, of course, broadcast television. There's all sorts of possible sources for information. We hear a lot about bots, kind of disembodied bots online. But how important are influencers of the flesh and blood variety, and where are you seeing the biggest problems?
So glad that's come up, because we are seeing a shift, and Esosa can actually talk about this too, because the report that Onyx Impact just came out with highlights this issue, which I'm really excited about. We aren't talking so much about this outside of disinformation spaces, but within the space, we are increasingly focusing on influencers. What is so fascinating right now in media altogether, just taking a step back for a second, is that we're seeing less and less trust in mainstream media and more trust in influencers, specific voices, specific personalities, especially with apps and social media platforms like TikTok. People are more likely to say, I listen to this person for my news, or I trust this voice for my information. So across the media landscape, we're seeing more and more trust in influencers and in personalities. At the same time, because of that trust that's growing with an audience, we're seeing those influencers being tapped or used by bad actors to spread misinformation. A large part of that, some of that is in Latin American communities. We see that especially in terms of Russian propaganda. Many of them have tapped influencers, whether that's in Mexico or other countries, like in Africa, like parts of Africa, countries in Africa, or even parts of India, to spread misinformation about Ukraine, for example. So that's even one facet of it. And then on the other side, here in the US, we see this particularly with far-right activists, far-right platforms. We're seeing this with influencers who are spreading information that they've been given or haven't vetted themselves. One key example of this that I always turn to is an influencer trip that was taken to a Shein factory. Shein is a clothing factory that was like a year ago. And they asked these influencers to come in and promote and talk about this factory, talk about all the good stuff that was happening in it. And there was a lot of pushback, thankfully, online from folks saying, this is not what journalism looks like. Actually, what we see in Shein is a lot of violations, et cetera, all this information that people were fact-checking the influencers with. But that didn't stop the influencers from going on and going forward and talking about the company. And so that's just an example of what we're seeing now in politics. We're seeing influencers being flown out to DC, or at least the reports that I've been getting is influencers being flown out to DC, being coached and being taught to talk about politics, whether they're from battleground states like Arizona or North Carolina. They're being taught to talk about this because they're of course political actors, but also bad actors too, who know that one way to get in front of an audience is through an influencer. Now, that doesn't mean that all influencers have bad intentions or don't know what they're talking about or can't be trusted. It does mean that we need to pay a lot more attention to what influencers are saying, who might be motivating them to say these things, or who might be behind them, and whether we can actually trust their information or verify it for ourselves.
And then, of course, there's AI, right, Kadia? I mean, AI creates characters who could be your unknown influence.
Right, which is even wilder. I mean, talk about technology on technology, or just getting super meta. We're now going to probably see, and we are likely already seeing, AI influencers, AI bots impersonating influencers, impersonating people to pretend that they're influencers that they should trust and follow and spread their misinformation.
Okay, so I mean, all of you, I feel like just kind of saying, are we screwed? But I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that on public television. So I will say, how do we combat any of this? Esosa, I'm getting pretty discouraged here, but you have suggested there are things people can do. Regular people, influencers, journalists, hey, old journalists out there. Like what? What are good tools for people to use?
Absolutely. And, I think as Kadia was saying, right now we are seeing the correlation between content and credibility crumble, right? Like that is no longer how people see, how people get their news. It's now credibility is now a lot of the time determined by following, right? Like the bigger, and that's why influencers are such a massive potential stream to get access to, for their authenticity, for their reach. And so that's what we have to make sure that we are looking at when it comes to solutions. And so one of the big solutions that Onyx Impact is really focused on is investing in Black media in particular, and engaging with Black online influencers and gateway platforms as well, making sure that we keep saying this word trust in this conversation, but it is that trusted messengers are going to become the key to stemming disinformation as we move forward in this country. That is going to be the most important thing that we can do: identify local, state, national trusted messengers, both political and non-political, and make sure they're constantly showing up on these platforms, make sure their reach is being expanded, make sure people see them as an authentic source of news and information. And so investing in Black media, where 64% of Black folks in the country still get a lot of their news from Black-owned sources of media. So making sure that they can have a much larger footprint is one thing. The other thing that we can do actually is quite simple. It is telling folks to make sure that they can fact check. They can just check your sources before you share something. And, research shows that reminding folks to check your sources actually works for 72 hours, right? So there's a need to kind of consistently do it to be effective, but it is ineffective. It is.
Wait, you mean we have to send out that message every 72 hours because people forget it?
Basically, look, we all got things to do, right?
We're all busy. I mean, that rush for likes, it puts an input, puts us a focus on getting something out as quickly as possible, being the first.
Exactly.
This all reminds me of my conversation with Naomi Klein about her book Doppelganger, where people get confused between her and Naomi Wolf. In that conversation, I came away thinking we need to trust ourselves and our relationships better. If you know someone and you suddenly hear them saying something that sounds unlike them, it probably is not them. At least check, right? I mean, gut check. Maybe we start there.
Yes,
Esosa?
100% gut check. And I would also say as we're searching, as we become more and more online, we actually need to be a little cautious, train our brains to be cautious of content that elicits a very strong emotional reaction immediately. It very well may be true, but that's the type of content in particular that we need to just take a second, and double check it to make sure that it's accurate. If something is making us very angry, if something is making us very, very, very sad, what have you, just take a beat, double check it, and make sure that it is what it says it is. And then I'd also say that we also need to make sure that we are putting Black trusted voices onto all of our platforms, highlighting those voices onto our platforms, making sure that we're each doing our own part to improve the reach of actual trusted messengers. I could go on with guidance for like another hour.
Well, we will put information on our website about how people can get more of the information that you're putting out through Onyx. But I want to come to Teimoa. You've also made available some sort of explainers and tools for both reporters and receivers of this information. What do those look like? What are you recommending people do?
We're doing media literacy pieces for social media. I believe that is the way that approach people in the way very personal, in camera, in Spanish, with your background, your cultural issues, explaining how to use Google or WhatsApp or any tool, or like as Esosa said, check your feelings, check your URL, ask your uncle or your aunt or your abuela, what is your sources for this video? What is your source for this comment? And at the same time, as Reynolds Journalist Institute fellow, I prepare with my team in Chequeado a guide, a toolkit for journalists who cover Latino communities, with data, with some particular issues about these groups, these communities, and 16 tools that is not for professionals fact checker, is for everyone who wants to detect disinformation, counteracting some, debunking some images or videos, And I think that is our part in this story, in this particular year, in the middle of this campaign, with a lot of disinformation that the people, the audiences have, how to understand, how to consume all of this. And for journalists, this is a group of tools useful in your newsroom, small, large, and media literacy. I think that the most important thing is that this is a problem that we can do this together. It's a collaborative work. We have an alliance with more than 90 media outlets because we understand that we can do that. Yes.
Well, I appreciate that, Teimoa, because I'm already feeling exhausted. But there is a lot that we can do as individuals. And as reporters, I always say, if you don't want to be too reliant on online sources about what happened where, when, go places. Actually be present. Then you'll know whether it happened or not. Although there's no guarantee. Kadia, to you, there's also a role for government and law. And you recently wrote a piece about a case that was in front of the Supreme Court, a win of sorts. I want you to just tell us a little bit about that. And then for everybody, is there one change in the law that you think would help this situation? And do any other countries have that law? So think about that. But Kadia, what happened to the court that was a win?
So the Supreme Court sent a case back to the lower courts concerning laws that were basically restricting how social media platforms can moderate their content. Now, social media platforms were saying, well, this is a violation of our First Amendment rights. You can't do this, to states like Florida and Texas. And then Texas and Florida, those states which have gone heavily after social media companies after Trump was suspended, his account was suspended and then restored. Those states are saying, well, you're violating our rights by censoring us, by taking down certain conservative content. And so that was what the case was about. And essentially right now, even though it is in limbo, it is seen as a victory for social media companies as they relitigate this case. However, going into the election season, which was the most important part of seeing the result of the Supreme Court, case was that whether or not we would see a protection for everyday people against the widespread and the wild, wild west is what I call it, of misinformation on social media. Of course, we can say that, and we should say that is a personal responsibility of all of us to check our facts, to verify, to help each other verify. But there is also a very important role that the government, that lawmakers play, that policy plays in making sure that everyday people are protected from misinformation. And there has been a push, not nearly as big enough as experts and researchers have warned, for social media companies to work with lawmakers and researchers to make sure that there is adequate content moderation when it comes to disinformation. I can tell you right now, as someone going through so many conspiracy theories and so much disinformation around the shooting this past weekend at the Trump rally, many of these posts are still up. Many of them may have disclaimers that they're false, whether they are doctored photos or language that has it's basically outright lying. Those posts are still up and they aren't being taken down. And I know social media companies, in the conversations I've had with them, it's a game of whack-a-mole, essentially. They can take something down, but something else will pop up. And so ultimately, there is no regulation overall about spreading misinformation intentionally or disinformation intentionally on social media platforms. But there's a lot that needs to be done to make sure this is happening. At some point, we can't leave it up to everyday people to fight their way, because as Esosa said, it's expensive. And as Tamora said, it's going to take a lot of time and energy from everyone. But at the same time, we all need to be in this fight.
Tamora, are there any countries that have good regulation of this, or any states, or is there a law you'd like to see passed here?
I'm not sure. I have been seeing something, some ads in Europe, but in the United States, I think that is necessary. And I thought that for 2024 and for this election with the first presidential election with AI, with the use of AI, I thought that we, in that point, we already need to have a kind of regulation or something like a moderation for.
So I hear you saying very politely, it's too late.
It's too late.
Yeah. Oh, Esosa, cheer me up. Is it too late? And what law would you like to see passed? Or is there one? Because this is a difficult area, free speech versus misinformation and propaganda.
It absolutely is. I think, one clear thing that we should be doing, in a functional democracy, a functional political system, is banning generative AI from political ads. Full stop. I think that the serious harms outweigh any benefit. We don't actually. We've been able to make political ads for centuries without it. And so I think that is, one thing that we have seen other countries do. We see some states banning deep fakes in particular, but generative AI in its totality should be banned in across any kind of political ad. And that's actually, the way that we're going to have to approach a lot of these issues from a policy perspective, because we are so far behind, because unfortunately of what our political leaders look like relative to the technology they're trying to regulate, is we need to kind of start with blanket statements and move to, over time, as we have a better understanding of how these things work, right? Allow for more and more flexibility. But again, that's very difficult to do. And very difficult.
You're saying they don't get the seriousness of it because they're too old?
I didn't say that. You said it.
Okay. That was the implication to me of what they look like versus the
I just think that, when these tech companies have actually been called into Congress, before Congress, to hold them to account, it has been far too late each and every single time. And so we need a strategy to get ahead of the problem as opposed to being reactionary that we don't currently have. And until that point in time, we're going to have to continue to try to do, as much as we can ourselves.
Well, we have real-life politicians that spread misinformation and lies, and some of them are at the very top of tickets running for president. So our problem goes from the very real right down to generative AI. It's a huge problem. I thank you all for helping us to at least put a finger on it. I like to end these conversations by asking people what they think the story will be that the future tells of this moment. On this particular topic, I feel like the future will be in a very different situation than we are with regard to both the problem and the solution. But Esosa, starting with you, what do you think 20, 50, 100 years from now people are going to say about us in this moment?
20, 50 odd years from now, I think folks are going to say that the period between 2018 and 2026 represented a new unprecedented spread of disinformation in our political system that caused a level of division that we will be working through for a very long time. At the very end, so many of these narratives, so much mis and disinformation, the strategy is to divide, right? And so to push back against it, we really do need to make sure that we are creating messages of unity, of hope, of empowerment. And if we can't do that, we'll be looking at this time period in 20, 40, 50 years as a time period where we started to slip away from what makes American democracy such a wonderful experiment.
And what about you, Timoa? Thank you for that.
The landscape is weird because in 2016 we had a lot of disinformation in the middle of midterms and presidential election. Then in 2020 it got worse, and right now it's getting worse. And it is a little bit negative landscape, but I think that the technology is perfectioning, is advanced, is getting better, and I think that the same AI that is causing damage with deep fake and something like that, it come to help to journalists and everybody to understand how to consume that, how to use that to detect disinformation, how to use that to use, for example, hive moderation and other tools with AI to combat disinformation. And I think that the future is good, but we have to work a lot and work together. I think that the collaborative work between media outlets, between in groups, in organizations, pushing regulations, moderations, is not about control, please. It's about regulation, moderation. I think that we have to construct that, to construct that future.
But I love the idea that the very technology that's hurting us now might help us in the future. Kadia, you buy that?
I have hope in it. I have hope that we'll get smarter and better, and that will actually make sense of this. My actual hope is that the future, when I tell my kids about this period, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And I'm glad we made it out of it. And I do think we'll make it out of this. I mean, 7 years ago, I was talking about user-generated content and the threats that we saw there. Now that's not even a thing. Now we just talk about content creators, influencers, AI, generative AI, deep fakes. And that's a 7-year span. I can only hope that 50 years from now, when I talk to students or my own children, they'll just say that, wow, at least we got smarter.
Kadia, Timoa, Esosa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
I'm with you. Let's hope. I'm with you in the hope.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this full uncut conversation from our Meet the BIPOC Press monthly series. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters. Please join our members now by making a one-time donation at lauraflanders.org/donate. or make it monthly. Go to patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. That's also where you'll find more information on this conversation in the episode notes posted. That's patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. And thanks again to all our member supporters.